So much of life is about making good decisions, and that's certainly true when it comes to retirement planning. But sometimes we may need to rethink our decisions when an extraordinary event occurs, which of course, one has. It's that time again, time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Yes, facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
Joining me right now is Sound Income Strategies founder and CEO David Scranton.
They've created a new type of inflation. And although markets have always been an emotional place, they seem to be even more of an emotional place these days.
Jeffrey Small, market watcher, is with me.
Stock market dynamic is getting ready to significantly change.
So let's bring in our co-host, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services and also the brand ambassador for the Retirement Income Store. I'm David Scranton. If you've already decided when you plan to retire, what you plan to do, and how you plan to protect your money and generate income, well then, good for you. Still, you don't need me to tell you that the entire world has changed dramatically in the last several months. And for many, those changes mean decisions they had already made about retirement may no longer be right or even possible. On today's show, we'll look at some of the major ways the coronavirus crisis could affect or may have already affected your retirement plan and the key decisions involved in that plan. Those decisions include when to retire, when to start taking Social Security, how to prepare for healthcare costs, and how to allocate your assets. Joining me, of course, will be my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small, along with Jim Rogers, American businessman and financial commentator. But before we talk to Jeff, let's talk about how the pandemic may potentially impact your first big retirement decision, and that is when to retire. Not long before the coronavirus outbreak occurred, the Income Generation did a show all about the pros and cons of retiring early versus retiring later. And on that show, we noted that a 2019 survey found that 52% of Americans said they plan to exit the full-time workforce before age 65. The results of that survey might be very different today. But according to a new survey by the Streetwise Retirement Confidence Index, 26% of respondents said they would postpone their retirement due to the pandemic and the economic conditions it's caused. That survey was actually conducted back in May. The number might be even higher now after 3 more months of economic damage and uncertainty. But the question becomes, should you postpone your retirement due to the crisis? Is it the right move, or does sticking with your original decision make more sense? Maybe even you should consider retiring earlier. The answer will differ for everyone depending upon a wide range of factors. However, the most important factor right now may simply be where you work. Millions of Americans previously employed in retail, restaurants, hospitality, and travel have suffered. They've been laid off, they've been furloughed, or had their hours reduced during the pandemic, and many still remain out of work. Yet millions of others have been relatively unaffected job-wise. If you're employed in one of the more stable fields, such as healthcare, education, government, or IT, there may be no need to change your decision about when to retire. If you're concerned that the pandemic's economic impact may damage other aspects of your retirement strategy, you may want to keep working longer than you had planned, just kind of sort of as insurance. But if you're in a field that's been directly affected by the pandemic, it may actually make sense to retire sooner than you had planned. In fact, a report by the economics department at the University of Chicago estimates that as many as 42% of workers that were laid off or furloughed during this crisis will ultimately not be rehired full-time. Those that are will most likely be younger workers due to both financial and health considerations. And what's more, starting a second career or finding a new job, if that was part of your retirement plan, may also be more difficult for older workers in this new corona economy. Of course, another key decision closely related to when you retire is when to start taking Social Security. How might the current crisis affect that decision? I'll talk more about that coming up in just a moment. And now it's time to welcome my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store located in Melbourne, Florida. Jeff is the brand ambassador for our very own retirement income store, as well as Amazon best-selling author of the book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. So Jeff, I was really excited to talk with you today about this concept of resetting your retirement because I've had clients reset their retirements in all kinds of different ways. So I was hoping you had some real life stories that you could share with our viewers and our listeners. So as they're considering these things and trying to make these decisions, they don't have to feel like they're in it alone.
Well, Dave, when the correction happened in March, it was kind of a wake-up call for everybody to say, hey, I got to take a harder look at my situation to make sure I'm going to be able to have some survivability. And so what we did internally was we did a stress test on everything everybody owned, right? And it's the same thing that everybody has to do now. They've got to do a stress test on all of their resources and measure how much they can withstand going forward in terms of how much income can be created from all their sources, how much risk exposure, and how much income can be created from their savings. And we have to compile those. And so I've lots of requests the last month or two to do that for many folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's interesting because I've seen people, of course, postpone retirement or consider postponing it. People who've gotten laid off before they're ready to retire. One particular lady lost her job, and it's going to be hard to retrain given her skill set and at her age. So unfortunately, we kind of had a plan for retirement, at age 70, but now her retirement's going to be much more inferior. So she's even had conversations with her son about like building a mother-in-law apartment, and he seems happy to do it. He's actually a builder, and if they can get that done, if it works for them, the family dynamic, then that could basically save her enough money where now all of a sudden retiring early won't change her lifestyle. So that's one real world thing that I found helped in her particular case.
No, that's a good thing, and you're right. The inferior is the big fear that everybody thinks that their financial situation is going to be inferior going forward. But fortunately, things are coming back. The market looks good. It would be nice if we can get a decent interest rate again at some point in the future. Maybe sometime towards the end of next year, the year after that, we see rates go up a little bit from where they are today. But that's not going to help everybody who's got money in the bank trying to generate some interest income. They have to look at other sources, and there are many other sources to do that other than bank savings, which everyone's complaining about. They can't get any rates of interest on anything in the bank.
Yeah. And it's interesting because today the yields that we get for clients are still very respectable. I mean, just about all my clients, I know your clients are, certainly over 4% or so on interest and dividends net of fees. But those numbers, going back over a year were over 5%. So, to me, that's one of the benefits of making the transition from growth to income, as I always say, from the G to the I before retirement. And I'll give an example. I've had actually a client that he's a doctor, and she does some functions in his office part-time, but he was planning on working for a while. He was really enjoying it, but they made the transition from the G to the I to increase their interest and dividends, I want to say almost 4 years ago now. And because they did that, they locked in some good rates, over 5% net. And with all this COVID stuff, he just called me a couple weeks ago and said, I'm retiring. I'm out. I'm retiring at the end of the year, and let's turn on the faucet with income because it's just too risky. He doesn't want to end up getting COVID at his age. I mean, who knows? It could be one of those ventilator type situations. So there are definitely a lot of benefits from going from the G to the I philosophically several years before retirement and not waiting till the last minute, because in this kind of environment, you really never know when the last minute's going to be, right? It could change because you change it, like in the case of this doctor, or it could change it because this lady just lost her job and it's probably not coming back.
Well, you're exactly right. And the best thing that we do for our customers, Dave, and all the viewers need to listen to this very closely, the best thing they need to find an advisor to do, or they need to work with us, not as, I'm not trying to sound like an infomercial, but they need somebody who's going to show them how to transition from being in a growth mindset their entire career to a conservation and income mindset, because it's not about accumulation in retirement. And when you look at total return equals income plus growth, that is validated. We're looking at how to marshal the assets and get the most income and output out of your resources by way of total return. That's something that everybody needs to do. And that's a hard transition to make by yourself. You have to work with a qualified financial advisor that's going to show you how to do that.
Yeah, you can't engineer, this whole concept of using the withdrawal method, as you and I often call it, that is engineering income by staying in mutual funds during retirement and just withdrawing shares, doesn't work. It's one of the most cancerous strategies you could have when you're close to retirement. In fact, I always talk about how the first 20 years of the century, the market averaged 5.8% based upon the S&P 500. But yet, if you stayed in the market and you withdrew 4% from your portfolio didn't grow, as most people think it would if you made 5.8, but you only withdrew 4% a year. Your portfolio actually shrunk, and you would have lost about 2/3 of your portfolio, essentially, in the first 20 years of the century had you retired in the year 2000. So the good news is we have Jim Rogers coming up in just a few minutes. I can't wait to ask Jim what he thinks. He tends to be more of a speculative guy, more stock-based. So I'm interested to see what advice he has for those who want to reset their retirement and essentially, get more income, so to speak. So good question. I assume you've got some good questions set up on China too for him, as you typically do, I would assume.
China.
That's true. That's China, as they call it. That's right. That's right. Great. So, it's interesting. I'll do one more story. We'll take a break. I've got another lady, actually, that age 62 is retraining, taking accounting classes. Just came out of one of those industries where she doesn't think she's going to be able to get reemployed. So at age 62, going back to school to take accounting classes, because her thought is every business that survives needs some accounting work done, whether it's accounts payable, accounts receivable. So retooling at age 62, but God bless her. That's the right thing to do for sure. Jeff, stick around here, as I know you will, as you have no choice because we pay you good money to be the co-host, right?
Where am I going? Where am I going, Dave? Where am I going?
You're going absolutely nowhere, my man. We need to take a quick commercial break. You stay with us too. We have much more coming up here in a moment on the income generation. We'll be right back. I'm David Scranton. As we reopen the economy, a renaissance has begun in the world of investing. If you or your advisor are not prepared for the new Corona economy, you could be left behind. You don't have to cross your fingers and toes hoping for growth in this unpredictable stock market. There is a more conservative way, and that is to invest for income without all the stock market risk.
Call the Retirement Income Store today at 888-888-4176 for your free Retirement Income Kit. Call 888-888-4176 now.
Investing for income? The idea has grown in popularity over the last several years due to today's volatile stock market. But if you're at or near retirement age, it's no longer just how much you've saved, it's about maximizing and protecting your life savings while minimizing your risk from market ups and downs. David J. Scranton's new book, The Retirement Income Story, is here to help baby boomers face the challenges of investing in this age of economic uncertainty. Visit theretirementincomestory.com to learn more.
For most people, the decision about when to retire is closely aligned with their decision about when to start taking Social Security. Now, as you probably know, the longer you can delay collecting Social Security, the higher your payments will be. For example, you can increase your monthly benefit by 8% for each year you delay collecting after reaching full retirement age. So if your full retirement age is 66, you'll have increased your monthly benefit by 32% if you wait until age 70. Naturally, the reverse is true if you start taking payments before you reach full retirement age. So if that age, let's say, is 67, and you start collecting at age 62, your benefits will have been reduced by 30% each and every month. So in some cases, delaying your retirement to get more Social Security income might make sense, even if it means working reduced hours, maybe with a reduced salary, as many people are actually having to do right now. Of course, that won't be the case for everyone, nor will it be even really an option for some. But the fact is, it's inevitable that many older workers will claim their Social Security benefits early as a result of COVID-19, either because they're worried about returning to work or because they're simply unable to find new jobs. The same trend was observed during the financial crisis, and the increase in early claims this time could be even higher depending upon how long the recession lasts. However, before you change your decision about when to start taking Social Security, please remember this. There's a wide variety of factors that need to be considered when making this important decision. Your employment situation is really only one of them. Other factors include your age, your health, your marital status, your retirement goals, the financial markets, as well as how your other retirement assets are allocated. And the right financial advisor can identify all these factors and weigh them against different scenarios to help you make the best decision. As I've explained before, oftentimes the difference between the best method and the second best method of collecting Social Security for you could mean as much as an extra $100,000 or more of cumulative benefits over the course of your lifetime. And now it's time to bring in my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small, along with our guest, Jim Rogers, American businessman and financial commentator. He's also the chairman of Rogers Holdings and Beelan Trust Incorporated. Jim, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
I am delighted, David. I'm a fan.
Well, listen, it's last time we spoke, the economy was doing well, the markets were doing well, and some things still look good on the surface. But as you know, the topic of today's show is really resetting your retirement in light of this coronavirus crisis. So talk to our Income Generation members, those retired or within 10 years of retirement, and tell them what things you think they should be considering, or if they should be considering resetting their retirement in light of what's going on now.
Well, David, you need to do a show on resetting your life. This has changed just about everything, whether you're 17 or 77. You better reconsider a lot of things, including retirement. Well, the first thing, of course, is interest rates are zero or nearly zero. So as far as getting yield, it's very, very difficult. I urge people right now, junk bonds are going through the roof because everybody's so desperate for yield. It's better to earn 1% a year than to lose 4 or 5% a year. And if you don't know that, try it and you'll find out. So I would urge people to be careful of junk bonds and taking risks that they don't understand, because this is not going to last forever. We are going to have interest rates again in the world.
Up until recently, we've had a pretty long period, maybe 7 years or so, with not a lot of junk bond defaults. And it's possible that investors have gotten overly confident, maybe borderline cocky, thinking, well, junk bonds are still pretty safe. But with the corporate bankruptcies we're seeing right now, clearly that's not the case anymore, right?
David, what you just said, things are different this time. They're not ever different this time. Yes, it's been 7 years and people think, everything is okay. That just makes it worse. Do not get overconfident, because the world has not changed that much, and we will have defaults again, and we will have interest rates again.
Sure. So what, somebody who needs income then, what do you think? Maybe if you go to high dividend yielding blue chippy type stocks, that maybe their bond issues would be, triple B or higher, they'd be investment grade, maybe even A rated, but you're getting a better yield on their stocks than you are by their bonds by a long shot. Is that what you'd consider for income, perhaps?
Well, yes, David, if you know what you're doing, but don't go let somebody say to you, this stock is yielding 3%, buy it. And you don't have a clue what it does, or you don't have a clue what the business is, or whether it's good value or not. No, there's nothing worse than investing in something you don't understand, because it has nearly always, at least in my case, it has nearly always led to problems, if not disaster. So be careful. I know it's difficult times. Don't think I don't have the same problem. We all do, but don't overreach and make mistakes.
Yeah, that's a chapter right out of Berkshire Hathaway. Chapter right out of Warren Buffett's words, essentially. I know Jeff's chomping at the bit to talk to you about China and some questions there. Before we do that, though, I have to ask you one more thing. You intimated a moment ago that you thought at some point interest rates would go back up again. And I'm in the camp that we're in a new normal of excessively low interest rates with all the world's central banks flooding the markets here. So if you do think rates are going to go back up, how high and why? Talk to us about that.
Interest rates have never been this low in recorded history worldwide. This has never happened before. And maybe the world has changed dramatically, but governments everywhere are spending huge amounts of money, borrowing huge amounts of money, and printing huge amounts of money. Throughout the history of the world, those kind of conditions have ultimately led to currency debasement and higher interest rates. Maybe it won't this time. Maybe now everything is different, but it always has in the past.
So is it possible then that what we've seen this time lately, over the last 7 or 8 years, is not so much currency debasement and inflation of costs of goods and services? Alternatively, we've seen inflation, asset inflation, because baby boomers aren't spending the money. They're saying, I've got to save this. I've got to put it in the bank and I've got to invest it. And therefore, all the assets have gone up. So, to me, it seems a decent chance that we might continue to have asset inflation, even though maybe things are overinflated already, because people just aren't buying goods and services quite to the level they were as they get older. And am I off base in your opinion, or any truth to that?
We are seeing asset inflation. Bonds are the highest they've ever been in recorded history all over the world. American stocks are making all-time highs. Look out the window. We're having asset inflation in most parts of the world. It's happening. Can it continue? As long as governments print huge amounts of money, they are showing us a good time. Will that last forever? To repeat, historically, it has not lasted forever. Historically, people say, wait a minute. We've seen this movie before. We want out. And I don't know when. You can watch your show to find out when, but it's not going to last forever.
Yeah, and I never want to be the guy who says this time it's going to be different, although I find myself tending to make that claim these days. So, Jeff, I have to apologize. We have 30 seconds left. I wanted to hand it over to you. We have to take a commercial break. So 30 seconds. Do you have a quickie for Jim about China? I know you're chomping at the bit, or if not, we'll go to break and we'll do that in the next segment.
Well, Dave, if you weren't such a windbag, I could have more than 30 seconds, but we'll go to break.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so stay tuned, because when you come back, Jeff Small has a lot of good pointed questions for our guest today, for Jim Rogers, about China, what's going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So stay with us. We have much more to come right here on The Income Generation.
Diane and her husband dreamed of spending their retirement traveling, but that changed when she became her mother's primary caregiver. Now her day starts before 6 a.m., helping Mom often late into the night. It's a stressful job, but Diane wants the best for her mom. Sound familiar? We thought so too. Caregiving can take a toll on your family, but the Retirement Income Store is here to help. Call 1-888-888-4176 to find out how the Retirement Income Store can help you achieve financial empowerment during retirement.
For behind-the-scenes photos, retirement planning tips, and upcoming giveaways, follow The Income Generation Show on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch video clips, guest interviews, and to catch up on past episodes.
Your job and Social Security have something in common that makes all decisions around them critically important. They're both reliable sources of income. You may already have a nice nest egg saved up. However, until it's been allocated effectively for retirement, it's neither a source of income nor necessarily reliable. If you're still invested primarily for growth in things like stocks or stock mutual funds, your nest egg may be vulnerable to real and significant shrinkage. It's significant enough that it may no longer be enough to meet your retirement needs and goals. Now, that's true in general, but especially in the midst of one of the greatest economic crises in American history. So far, the stock market's been amazingly resilient. Although, as I pointed out, its resilience has been irrational and based mainly on artificial influences, namely the Fed's massive relief efforts. The fact is that the hard data actually shows that our recovery from the coronavirus recession is likely to be a long, slow process, and most economists agree. More pain is probably in store for stock market investors. So the point is, this crisis demonstrates exactly why investing for income is such a logical strategy for investors in or nearing retirement. Its primary goal is to help protect your assets from the volatility and the uncertainty that we're experiencing now, but also to help you provide dependable income. It's to help you allocate them in such a way that these ongoing sources of retirement income can complement your Social Security and be enough to have the retirement you've dreamed of after retirement. And that income reliability stems from two things. First, the fact that income-based strategies are generally better shielded from market volatility than compared to growth-based strategies. And second, the fact that they're oftentimes contract-based, which ensures you that your rate of income will not shrink even if the value of your principal investment temporarily does. And your contract also assures you the return of your principal investment if you hold it to maturity. And that's, of course, if you assuming that there are no defaults. Ultimately, the decision to switch your strategic focus from growth and capital gains to better protection and retirement income is a sound one regardless of market conditions. I believe that during a global pandemic and a period of historic economic uncertainty, that advice is sounder than ever before. Now let's bring back Jeff Small, along with a good friend of the income generation, Jim Rogers, American businessman and financial commentator. So, Jeff, my apologies for being, as you called it, a windbag in the last segment of the show. I know you're chomping at the bit with some great questions for Jim about China. So, Jeff, take it away.
So, Jim, it's great to see you on the show. I guess you're in Singapore right now. That's your home base. So you've got a unique Asian perspective. We're looking at a potential political change here as we go through the strife over here domestically in the United States. And if we have an administration change, we're going to see trade risks probably diminish. So if that ends up happening and trade risks do diminish, what Chinese stocks do you like that could benefit from a change in administrations in that regard? Tell us what some of your picks are, what you like going forward if that happens.
Well, Jeff, you know what's happening in the world, and anything to do with travel, tourism, transportation, restaurants, hotels, they've been smashed. So I, anyway, am trying to find things in China, since we're talking about China, that have been smashed. I've bought Chinese wine companies recently. People don't go to dinner. They don't go to the bars. They don't go to the discos. So wine, needless to say, is down a lot. Most people still haven't heard of Chinese wine companies. I hope someday I hope you and I, Jeff, someday are sitting in a restaurant drinking Chinese wine.
So, Jim, there's lots of promising vaccine trials going on here, the best results that we've ever seen in a stage 1, stage 2 trial. It looks like we could get a hold of this coronavirus with vaccines and therapeutics before the end of the first quarter of next year. And so what type of effect would that have on global markets, since you've got kind of a Singapore perspective? And what is your downside scenario forecast for if the virus gets worse and the vaccines don't come to light? Give us your range of the good, the bad, and the ugly here on what you see happening.
Well, if there's no cure, if there's no solution, be very, very worried about 2021, because no matter who's elected in the U.S., the world is going to have serious, serious problems. If somebody comes up with something, and lots of people are working, it will probably cause, for instance, emerging markets to have big rallies. They've been hurt very badly. I mentioned sectors before, like travel, tourism, transportation. All of those areas will have huge revivals. You know, in many parts of the world, I live in Singapore. The airport's basically closed. So if there's a vaccine, the airport's going to open and it's going to be a boom compared to present situation, that is.
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's the same story over here. You know, international travel is gone. Domestic travel is down to about 20% to 15% of what it was prior to the vaccine. So we're just kind of waiting for this stuff to come on deck. But it looks promising so far. So we'll have to see what happens in stage 3 with some of the trials we have going on into the late fall.
Well, we all hope, obviously, we all live in the same world. Let's hope that we can go back to some kind of normality again. We'll hope that we can all have a great time and make some money again.
Jim, what do you think about what's happening right now? Our relationship with China seemed to be getting better for a while as we're trying to get a trade deal done of sorts. And now it seems like the United States is going a little bit more isolationist when it comes to China. and of course are blaming really intellectual property security as the reason for that. I mean, do you think there's validity to that? And if so, do you think we're doing the right thing? I know you're not an isolationist guy, you're quite the opposite, so talk to us about that.
Well, there have been periods in world history when the world has closed off and periods in world history when we opened up. I hope we continue to open up. The Chinese certainly opened up for the last 40 years. Now even the Chinese are closing off to some extent. The Republicans have said out loud many times they're going to use bashing China to win the election this year. Whoever wins, I hope that in December and January, people start saying, okay, now we've done that. Now let's try to have some prosperity again and open up. Open economies and open markets. I mean, history has shown repeatedly that's better for the world than closing off.
So let's say that doesn't happen, and you're talking about buying Chinese companies, buying stocks in Chinese companies. Do you think then that in this, if there's essentially a financial Cold War, is this something that China can fare well? Or because U.S. has really a bigger economy in many ways that they can perhaps, maybe if this continues, then our Chinese stocks really could have the potential to be a good investment, or could it turn the other way for them?
David, trade wars have never been good for anything. One of the things that history shows is nobody wins trade wars, and trade wars are not good, and they sometimes lead to wars. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean people don't try them. They think they can win a trade war. One of the main lesson of history, David, is people don't learn the lessons of history. History will teach us that. I would hope that somebody will come to their senses in China and the U.S., and we will all open up. But it's not just the Chinese. I mean, Mr. Trump is bashing the Japanese and the Germans and everybody in sight. My reading of history, that is usually not the best way to go. I hope that after the election, he did huge amounts of business in China before he was president. I hope he opens up again.
Yeah. Well, the question is how much of it's political versus how much is a real concern. If it's all political, then no matter who gets in, you're right, things should turn back in the non-isolationist direction. So, Jim, we need to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being up this late at night from Singapore to interview with us. We really appreciate you being here once again.
My pleasure. Good night, Jeffrey.
And you stay with us too. Take care, Jim. We'll be right back here with a lot more coming up in a moment on the income generation. We'll be right back.
Meet Bob. 10 years ago, he made the shift from investing for growth in the stock market to investing for income. Today, many of his friends are terrified to open their recent statements, but not Bob. Bob is enjoying his retirement, counting his interest and dividends. By investing for income, Bob was able to reduce his exposure to market risk and establish renewable streams of income for retirement. Sound familiar? If not, start with our free retirement income kit by calling 888-888-4176. The Retirement Income Store, where retirees go for income.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small. So Jeff, anything shock you in Jim Rogers' comments that he made just over the last two segments?
I thought he made real common sense comments, but I was shocked that he was buying cyclical stocks in China that were beaten up. That kind of blew me away. I guess I took that as, whatever tech plays he might be holding on to, he doesn't want to share those with us, but he's buying wine companies and travel and tourism and a few things that are pretty beaten up. And it's probably pretty smart because if the virus recovers quickly and it seems to be stifled over there, maybe international travel starts to come back next year. Maybe domestic travel comes back before that. So that was kind of shocking to me.
Yeah, a lot of people, as you know, are here in the United States and they're buying a lot of this stuff. They're buying a lot of those stocks here in the U.S. And of course, whether they've hit the bottom or not, only time will tell. We really don't know. So smart play or dumb play, we really don't know. I tried to push him back on the isolationist stuff. And if that continues, is that more likely to hurt the Chinese stock market than the U.S. stock market? But he, of course, had a lot of business interests over there. He certainly wasn't biting on that one, was he?
No, I mean, trade is still happening despite the tariffs, despite the conflict that's happening. But no, he wasn't biting on that.
So he mentioned inflation coming up. And although you and I don't think we're going to have any kind of hyperinflation coming up for a long, long time, because we're in this new world of low interest rates and so on and everything else. But still, for our viewers, for our listeners, inflation is a real deal. And I know that, as I said a moment ago, most people who retire feel like the effects that inflation has on them are truly much greater than the CPI index, the generally accepted inflation index we use here in the US, would indicate. So what have you found with your own client base over the years who've retired and how inflation has affected them?
Dave, I'm really glad that you asked me that. And so what we do with clients and what the viewers and listeners should do and require from their advisors is maybe a 2% increase in income every year from their portfolios, from their income models to complement themselves for inflation. And so let's say if somebody builds that 2% increase and they start out at $100,000 a year of income, all things included, and they put in a 2% fudge factor. In the second year, they're at $102,000. What's going to happen is they're not going to spend that money, Dave, because they're living on less than they actually need. They're getting more income than they actually need in that scenario. So most of the people that want that inflationary factor, they just want it for psychological reasons. It's not really going to do anything for them because they're not going to spend the money. It's just giving them a feel good that the inflationary factor is going. So what we do for everybody is we show them how to increase their money by that 2%, but we let them know in advance that you're probably not going to spend it unless you're on, traveling and having fun and doing all this. And so what's happening right now? And the savings rate is going to the roof because nobody can spend their money.
Yeah, and I find that when they first retire, they spend a little more because they're having fun. Then they kind of sow their wild retirement oats, so to speak. And then all of a sudden the expenses start to come down. So even though inflation's pushing expenses up, they're spending less because they had fun the first few years in retirement. But then all of a sudden you get to later years and bam, all of a sudden you have healthcare issues. And that's when inflation really starts to take over and they need more income. That's when they need those increases, not just from the current years, but from the previous years. Because as you know, healthcare costs increase, historically at least, at more than double the general rate of inflation. In fact, healthcare costs grow at about a rate of, on average, let's say they double about every 12 years. So if somebody retires at 65, that means by the time they're in their late 80s, healthcare costs can be 4 times what they are today. And of course, for our viewers and listeners, we're not talking about medical because hopefully you have the right medical supplement in addition to Medicare and so on. But what we're talking about is convalescent care. What if you take sick? You don't want to go into one of those godforsaken nursing homes. You never want to live there. You want to live in the comfort of your home. You want to hire help part-time or full-time. But now that's where inflation really starts to take its toll. Jeff, I'm sure you've seen that too. You've been in the business as long as me.
Yeah, we have seen that a number of times, and I cringe every time a new person that I'm working with for the first time says, I want to spend everything and not have any money in my 80s. That's when you need the most amount of money on deck so you can make sure and manage and take care of your own care because you are going to be autonomous and you're going to spend a lifetime's worth of health care in the last 2 years of life in terms of your total expense. And so we have to make sure and prepare for the 80s as well. We can't stop planning in our 60s or 70s. We've got to prepare for the 80s as well.
100%. And that's why keeping your principal intact makes sense because, again, as I said earlier, if you're that person who spent down your principal because you retired in 2000, even though the market made 5.8%, you withdrew 4% a year. And now 20 years later, you have a third of your money left, literally, which is what would have happened over the first 20 years of this century. Even if that were to happen, then you've got very little money left for home health care. But if you keep your principal intact and now you need to use it in your late 80s, go ahead. Jeff, you always hear me talk about my aunt and uncle, who that was their goal their entire life. They lived off their interest, didn't spend principal for so long. They got in their late 80s, they needed home health care, and then they spent it down, and it worked. When they finally died in the early 90s, they were able to stay in the comfort of the home forever. Now, granted, they didn't have a lot of money left over for heirs, but that wasn't their primary concern. And Jeff, of course, thanks again. Appreciate your insights as usual. And you stay with us. The show's not over. We have more to come in just a moment here on The Income Generation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small. And, right before the break, we talked about my aunt and uncle who thought they had enough to last them years and years in full-time home health care, and they really didn't. I mean, they if they hadn't died in the early 90s, if they lived 2 or 3 more years, they very well could have been out of money and forced into a nursing home. And the reason this happens, of course, is because, you can have $1 million sitting in an IRA and say, hey, it's going to grow in my retirement years, it'll be worth more. Full-time home health care is $150 grand a year. Heck, I've got 7 years of full-time home health care costs covered if worst case scenario. But what happens is if you don't plan for your RMDs right, to take it from interest and dividends, let's say now by the time you get to your late 80s, your IRA is down below $500,000. But now with healthcare inflation, it might cost almost $500,000 per year for home healthcare costs. So essentially what you end up with is you went from 7 years of coverage to having 1 year of coverage, right? And Jeff, I'm sure you've seen this in the real world too, talking to clients day in and day out, where you've had clients over the years where, maybe this happened to some of them, not, my aunt and uncle aren't alone.
Dave, we've seen a lot of scenarios just like that where people end up having to spend down all of their resources and there's nothing left for the remaining spouse, and then there's nothing left as a residual for anybody in the family, once both spouses have passed on. But I think going forward, there's a couple of different things that folks need to understand that watch the show and listen to the show, and understanding what's going to happen to them when they get into their 80s. And so we've taken many clients through this journey because we've worked with clients for, numbers of years now, over 30 plus years here. And so what we have to realize is when you get into your 80s, you're going to get sick of your house. And you're going to want to say, look, honey, I'm tired of the pool. I'm tired of the upkeep. I'm tired of the hurricanes. We need to move into independent living. That's going to cost a lot of money. Who's going to pay for that? You're going to pay for that. Then from there, if we need more than independent living because we can't get out of bed, feed ourselves, take our medicine, use the bathroom, or put on our clothes, then we're going to an ALF. And that also costs money. And then if we need more care than that for medical reasons, then we're going into skilled nursing care or a long-term care facility. And so as we take people through this value proposition, they have to understand at the end of this time tunnel, at the end of their lifetime, their resources have to be intact to transition them. And that's what a good advisor in the geriatric space will do for you. And we've worked with so many clients. We have so many stories we can share. And David alluded to his aunt and uncle. He's got clients he can talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old adage that my mom always told me, Jeff, and I bet your parents told you also, spend your interest, but never touch your principal. And I'm sure all of you as viewers, listeners, the income generation can relate to that too. So, it's funny, we become teenagers and we think our parents are the dumbest people in the world, but we get to our age, part of the income generation, and we realize how much wisdom they actually bestowed on us. And that's just one example. Stay with us. We have much more coming up in just a moment right here on the Income Generation. We'll be right back. I'd like to thank my guest, Jim Rogers, and also my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small, for joining me today here on the Income Generation. Most importantly, though, I'd like to thank you, our new and returning viewers. We've all had a lot of new decisions to make during this crisis, and hopefully your decisions around whether or not to take precautions to help protect your health have been easy ones. Whether you've been personally impacted by the coronavirus or you suspect the magnitude of the crisis has been overblown, either way, hopefully you've been taking safeguards to help protect yourself and to protect others regardless. A reality about risk and human nature that I think is relevant to the situation is that most rational people aren't willing to take a risk unless there's something in it for them. That is, they have more to gain if the risk pays off than they stand to lose if it fails. In other words, you may take no precautions during the pandemic and never feel the least bit sick. So, what you've gained from taking the risk is status quo, essentially nothing. However, what you might lose if the risk doesn't pay off is significantly more than nothing. You risk everything from nasty flu-like symptoms to, yes, even death. And more importantly, you risk the potential of spreading the virus and prolonging all the suffering it's caused. So to me, the decision on whether or not to take healthcare precautions seriously is an easy one. But by the same token, I believe the decision about whether to be just as cautious where your financial health is concerned is also an easy one. You may take no precautions to help protect your growth-based portfolio and see it fully or nearly recover within the next year or so. Or you may see it decimated by another major market downturn and be forced to radically alter your retirement goals and plans as a result. In other words, what you stand to lose if the risk fails is probably much bigger or much more significant than what you stand to gain if it doesn't. However, it doesn't have to be that way. You can reach out to a financial specialist who specializes in retirement income today and review your entire strategy. They can help you identify and make any changes you may need to help protect your money, to meet your income needs, and to stay on track to reach your retirement goals. So as always, stay safe and thanks for watching. If you're close to or in retirement and you're concerned about your money, it's essential you stay informed and up to date. And as you know, right here is where you can do it on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you next week.